If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you likely know two things. First, that I have a new book coming out soon, March the 25th, because if you've been listening, I've been mentioning it. And second, that when you are here, I bring on guests to talk about their big ideas and often, typically, about their books. Well, today's episode is a bit different. Rather than me asking questions about someone else's ideas, today I have a very special guest who will be asking me those kinds of questions rather than the other way around. Welcome to a very special episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live on your favorite social media channel. I hope that you'll think about doing that. You can find out how you can do that, when you can do that, and get some other cool insider stuff sometimes about the podcast by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do exactly that. Today's episode is brought to you by my next book, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world that is more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and a new set of tools to create the great results their organizations and teams want and need. And that's what Flexible Leadership provides you. You can learn more and get your copy at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And now let me bring in my very special guest. I will introduce her to you and we will get started. Her name is Julie Winkle Giulioni. And if you know Julie, please say in the comments that you know Julie. And if you don't, you're going to be glad that you do in a minute. She is a champion for workplace growth and development, helps executives and leaders optimize talent and potential within their organizations. She's been named as one of Inc. magazine's top 100 speakers. She's the author of Promotions Are So Yesterday, Redefine Career Development, Help Employees Thrive, and is the co-author of the international bestseller that's in I don't know how many editions now, and it's translated in 7 languages. You've probably heard of it. Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. Career conversations organizations need and employees still want. She's a regular columnist for Training Industry Magazine and Smart Brief and contributes articles on leadership, career development, and more to numerous publications, including Fast Company and The Economist. You can keep up with her through her LinkedIn or on her blog at Julie Winkle Giulioni, which we'll show to you a little later as well. And so, Julie, here's the deal. I'm going to hand ceremonially
ready
the mic to you, and you're in charge. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm so glad that you're here.
Oh my gosh, Kevin, this is such an honor. I have to say, to be able to turn the tables and ask you the questions. So thank you. You don't know what I might say here, though. So,
I have no idea.
Okay,
We are working without a net, everyone.
Experiment.
It's one thing to be on other people's podcasts, which I'm doing all the time. I've done several this week, and we're doing lots leading up to the book. But it just feels a little different when it's on my show. So
yeah,
I'm sitting down, so I'm ready.
I am loving this, and you don't have to worry. As you well know, I am a huge fan of your work, and needless to say, I love your new book, Flexible Leadership. It reflects the trade. Oh, well done. Your trademark characteristics. It's rich, it's reality based, it's actionable. What I so appreciate, though, is the structure that you have brought to what's really kind of an amorphous, loosey-goosey concept, which is flexibility. And so I have so many questions. We could go on probably for days. We won't. We'll keep it.
That's probably a good idea for everyone's benefit. I mean,
But
I
I
do have a
also
meeting at 1 o'clock after all.
all right, all right. Well, we'll get you out by then. But I also want to leave the space for our audience to share questions as well. So I'm going to get started and get the ball rolling. But please, if you've got questions for Kevin, and I can't imagine you don't, make sure to get those in chat, and we'll bring those to the fore as well. All right, Kevin, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So the big idea, the big goal of your book really is to help leaders see complexity, to embrace it, to operate within it without losing their heads. You use that expression. I love that so much. So I'm curious, what are you seeing, in terms of how complexity generated head losing is playing out in the workplace and what impact is it having?
Well, I think whether you want to use the word complexity or you want to use the word uncertainty, I think we all are feeling it. Most people are saying, well, the world is changing faster than ever. There's more uncertainty than ever. And I'm not sure that we can say that with certainty because we've not lived in another time. And yet I think it's pretty safe to say that if it's not the most, it's plenty. And so, uh, it, too many of us, and I'll say that whether we're thinking about ourselves with our leader hat on or not, that too many of us, when we look at uncertainty and we sense uncertainty, we either don't know what to do, and so we try to ignore it, which doesn't help us, or we don't, or we just try to power through it and do what we're used to doing, or what our natural habits are, or we really don't do anything. Like we know it's there, but we're trying to find an answer and we don't have an answer. And so we are immobilized by it. And the thing is, Julie, none of those are the best next
Mhm.
step for something that the uncertainty is real. We can't wish it away. It's not going anywhere. So we need to, as leaders and as humans, acknowledge that and say, okay, now what do we do given that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to dig into this notion of uncertainty. I mean, it's right there prominently in your subtitle,
Mhm.
and you share some fascinating research early on in the book about uncertainty. And I wonder if could you talk just a little bit about sort of the insidious nature of it and the problems that uncertainty causes for folks and organizations.
Well, I'm guessing most of you can come up with the problems that it causes, right? But I was doing a webinar yesterday, and I asked people in the chat. I said, "So tell me, which is worse, uncertainty or fear?" And like 90% of the people said fear, and yet the research all says, well, not so fast, right? Like all of the research says that given a choice between something that's uncertain and something that's certain, we will pick the certain, even if it involves electric shocks, right? So here's a little research. The research is that you're in one of two groups, and you're going to be glad that you weren't actually in one of these two groups when Daniel Ellsberg did this research in I think 1992. It's sort of famous stuff. Uh, he had two groups of people, and imagine you're in one of these two groups of people. You volunteered for this. You're going to get electric shocks, strong electric shocks, not like life altering, but strong electric shocks. You're going to get 20 of them. And half of the people get 20 of them, and all of them are of equal strength and they're relatively strong. And the other group of people get 20 electric shocks, 17 of which are that same strength, but three of them randomly, intermittently across the other 17 are less strong. They're moderate in nature. And the research says that people would say they were under more stress and had higher anxiety when they didn't know than when they were all the same. And and so even though the thing that we were getting wasn't fun and might have been painful, that was better than not knowing.
Yeah.
And so here's a decidedly non-research based version of this. Okay, like chances are you've all seen the movie The Wizard of Oz, and if you were like me when I was a kid and never got past the flying monkeys, I'm gonna give. There's a little spoiler alert here, but if you've watched to the end of the movie, you get to this point where Dorothy and her little troop are in this big room, and there's this flashing green thing on the wall, and this booming voice is speaking to them. It's the great and powerful Oz, and they are literally all shaking, right? They're fearful, but they're uncertain. They don't know what's going to happen next. But Toto the dog doesn't really care and sees this little curtain over there, pulls down the curtain with his or her teeth, and there's this little dude with a megaphone back there screaming. And that's the great and powerful Oz. And so once we know, then suddenly the anxiety goes away. Right. But until we know, when we're not sure, like we'd rather have some assurance, we'd rather have some certainty. And the reality, as in the world that we're in, we're trying to find that in our leadership roles, and it's just not really there. So we got to figure out how to go through it, go past it, and not try to wish it away.
Yeah, it's kind of the devil, even though it's the
Well,
devil. Yeah,
yeah,
you
exactly.
know it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Fascinating. That passage really caught my attention. Made me wonder what those people getting electrical shocks were getting as compensation.
Well,
They'd
I'm
have to
sure
be
it's
paid a
research. They got
lot.
paid something, but they
I'm
probably got like
hoping so.
$20. So I don't know. I have no idea what they got.
I would sign up for that one. Okay, so let me be a
You might have in
little
college, like
you're right.
it's that or giving your plasma. You got to pick.
You're right. A different time. I'm going to be a little provocative here
Okay.
and challenge you. So I think a lot of people are wondering, how do you square this idea of leadership flexibility with the consistency, the conviction that's really required to respond to, today's environment, high demands, high expectations of customers, uncompromising workplace. How do you square those two?
You know, that's an important question. Many ways, it might be the core question of the book, because if you as an individual don't get past that, then you're going to say, well, like, what's the point of this book, right? Like, I'm trying to make the case that say flexibility is quite honestly the antidote for this uncertainty, and so we have to look at this thing. Like, aren't leaders supposed to be consistent? Aren't they supposed to be stable? Aren't they supposed to be like a known quantity? Aren't we supposed to give people something that they can lean into and know what they're getting? Well, I want you to I can look out my window and see a tree, but I want you to imagine a tree in your mind's eye right now if you can't see one. And the first thing you'd say about a tree is, man, it is stable. It is firm. It is solid, right? And it's solid because it's rooted, right? And those roots keep it stable, solid, consistent, etc. But you don't have to look at the tree for very long to realize that it's also flexible. The branches are moving in the breeze or in the wind. And in fact, without the pliability of the branches, the tree can't really survive either. So the question that you ask is an important one, Julie, that aren't we supposed to be consistent? Aren't we supposed to be stable and solid as a rock? Yeah. Don't we also have to be flexible?
Mm,
Yes. So, like a tree, we have to be rooted. We have to be rooted in our principles and in our values and in the mission of
mm,
our organization. Like, those things aren't changing. That's where the stability comes from. But we must be flexible in how, in our approach to leading. And if we say, well, I lead this way because that's my style type, then we're now identifying with something and keeping us from flexing. So the big idea under all of that, Julie, is that uh, it's not about should we be flexible or consistent, but we must be both. A flexible leader
mhm.
doesn't think about the world in an either or way, but in a both and way.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's a great metaphor. And it leads to one of my favorite quotes. There are lots of great quotes in your book, but one that I really love is you say, "You are more than a style, a strength, or a type." Can you say a few more words about that?
Yeah, I sure can. People, you and I have been in this world of leadership development for a long time, and we're also both blessed to know some of the people that have been at it longer than us. And smart people whose shoulders we sit on have been working to help make leaders more effective for a very long time. And one of the things they've done is build assessments and style types and all those sorts of things, strengths and all those sorts of things. And all of those things are useful until they're not, right? And here's the thing about any of those models. The reason they're useful is because as human beings, we are great at recognizing patterns. And so if we can take something that's really complex, like human behavior, and simplify it a little bit, then the pattern recognition can help us see those patterns that can help us be more effective. However, none of those models were designed for us to like further simplify them, right? The models themselves already take out some of the nuance of complexity. And so what people then do is say, well, I'm a this, right? If you're a Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFP, or I'm in DISC. Well, I'm a high I, or like it didn't matter which thing you pick, or these are my strengths, or I'm a facilitative leader. Like we could go right on down the list. The thing is, once we've done that, once we've said that's who I am, we've taken all of the nuance out and we've made it our identity. And you are more than a letter, you're more than a style, you're more than a composite view. And yet too often unintentionally the models that we've created to help have gotten in the way because people now have limited their view to say, well, this is me, this makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me a strength overused becomes a liability. A style overused becomes a liability as well.
100%. a
Yeah,
hundred
yeah.
percent Yep.
So let's talk context for a bit. It clearly plays a key role in leadership flexibility. And so I'm curious, what are some practical ways that leaders can quickly kind of suss out the situation, assess what's going on, and determine the best leadership approach?
Yeah, in the book we talk about a model called the Cynefin framework, which is not mine originally. It took someone far smarter than me to create this framework, a gentleman named Dave Snowden. Uh, and and what I've done is tried to be really true to it, and unfortunately have to simplify it a little bit in order for us to use it like a map, right? Because the reality is that we need to know as leaders, well, let's just do this. I love maps, like a map, not the thing that's on my phone. That's
Mhm.
when I hit that Google Maps thing and I say, here's where I'm going, then it starts telling me what to do, which is fine and it's useful in its place, right? In 400 feet, turn here. Or if I'm driving faster, in a quarter of a mile, turn left. Like that's helpful, but I have no perspective from that. And as leaders, we have to have more perspective than that. As leaders, we have to be looking at a
Mm.
bigger picture, which means having a map to say, okay, what's the landscape here? What's going on here? Are all of the things we're doing here known and knowable and a best practice will actually work here? Well, 40 years ago, best practices, even 25 years ago, best practices were all the rage because things were pretty stable. We pretty much knew the knowable things, like building processes and following those processes got us a long way. But when the context isn't that clear anymore, when we look at the map and say, well, it's not quite going to get us there, like that's the problem that I had all after the pandemic, Julie,
Mm.
which
Mm.
was, well, now we've got to build a policy. And a policy is built around, well, we know things are stable. And like we can build a policy because this is what we got. And so now we have a policy, and a policy is fine in a stable, clear context. But in a complicated or in a complex context, we should be trying stuff. We should be doing what I say pilot rather than create policy.
Yeah.
And we should be trying stuff. And that's the idea of being flexible to say, what does context tell me about the situation, which might lead me to flex my approach to leading rather than just doing what comes natural, what
Mhm.
comes automatic, or what my style tells me or my strengths lead me to.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
All right.
You're asking these big questions. I feel like I'm talking too much, but
No,
I'm trying to
I
unpack
think
these ideas for you, and hopefully it's helpful.
well, and that's the challenge of turning the mic over. You're suddenly the one who's on the hot seat to do all the talking,
I
my
know.
friend,
I know.
and you're doing it brilliantly. Speaking of brilliant, I think you found a brilliant way to frame up the paradoxes, that today's leaders have to navigate. You refer to them as flexors, and I wonder, could you talk a little bit about the
Yeah.
concept, how you got to them, and maybe, I don't know, an example or two?
For those of you that are watching, I was smiling when you used the word paradox because for a long time, um, I played with that word as being in the title of the book. So
Mm.
um, I appreciate you using that word because I do think that what we're talking about here, there's a couple of things worth noting at this point. Everything I'm saying says that you might need to think about something other than what comes natural to you,
Mm.
which means I know that I'm suggesting to you that to be a more flexible leader will make you a more effective leader, but it will definitely be harder
Mm.
because I'm saying don't just automatically go with what comes natural or even what your learned experience is, because your learned experience might be in different context than the one you're in now. And so we have to think about it differently. So this idea of flexors, um, I don't even know if it's a word. It's a word now because I'm calling them
Yeah.
flexors. Um, and I should probably look that up, shouldn't I? But I just started calling them flexors. So here's the thing. The idea of a flexor is, and we've already hinted at one when we said, should we be consistent or should we be flexible? Right. That's not a flexor in the book specifically. I believe there are 19 in the book. And yet I think once you see this idea, you will start to notice this everywhere. That if we believe that we're in a both and world, that things that we used to consider as being opposites or opposing ideas are actually symbiotic. And that's the big idea behind a flexor. So here's another example of a flexor. Um, it's called the outcomes others flexor. And here it is. Are we leading towards outcomes or are we leading the team that we're leading others? Right. And I would say my definition of leadership is that leadership is reaching valuable outcomes with and through others. Notice that word
Mm.
and in the middle, that it's really so the flexor is it outcomes or is it others? And so let's use the pandemic as an example. I would say that early in the pandemic, generally speaking, leaders moved in the direction of others. We moved in the direction of we need to make sure our people are okay, right? We got to make sure, not just from a health perspective, but from a mental health perspective. Like I think, generally speaking, leaders got better and became more empathetic during the pandemic. They began to lean in the direction of others,
Yeah.
even if that wasn't their natural approach, right? And now what are we seeing? Well, now what we're seeing is with all of these return to office mandates and not just a couple of days a week, but you're coming back 5 days a week and all that stuff. And regardless of how you feel about that, and I think there's some reasons for that. Some may be good and some maybe not so good. That's not really the point of this conversation, but it's a move back in the direction of, well, it's about the outcome. It's not about the others. And so my point here is that if both are true, the question becomes, based on our context, which direction should we lean? The big idea is that in almost all of these flexors, all the way on either end is probably not the right answer most of the time.
Mhm.
The extremes, the end of the continuum, is probably not the optimum or best answer most of the time. So the question then is, which direction, how far in to the right or to the
Mhm.
left should we be based on what the context of the situation with our team, the nature of the customer relationship, and on and on and on. Where does that lead us to lean one
Mm.
way or the other. That's the idea of a flexor.
Yeah. So it really is about being intentional, being deliberate in the moment based upon the
100%.
context. Yeah.
I would actually
Yeah.
say, and I don't think this is in the book. You know, you and I have both written books, and you know what happens is you write stuff, and then you keep thinking about it, and then
Yeah.
you come up with the stuff. Well, I wish that was in the book.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know that it's in the book specifically, and even though I narrated it for the Audible a couple of weeks ago, I don't think it is. And maybe it's actually good that it's not in a way, but I believe that what I'm trying to give us all here is a framework for us to be wiser.
Mm.
To
Mm.
literally, because the more we understand context and what to do with context, well, first of all, the more we understand context, the smarter we become. And once
Mhm.
we know that, and then we have some ways to think about how to flex given that, I believe we're moving in the direction of being wiser, creating
Mm.
leadership wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. While you were talking, I did a little search, and flexor is
It is a word, right?
indeed a word. And here's how it's defined: a muscle whose contraction bends a limb or other part of the body. Just, I'd be curious to your reaction to that. Does it feel like what you
Well,
intend with flexor?
even when I was saying it, I was thinking, I bet there's a word there about
Mhm.
muscles. So read to me the definition again.
A muscle whose contraction bends a limb or other part of the body.
Well, so it's about this bending thing, right? So like so it's flexing to allow us to adjust, to shift, to flex. And so if you're not watching, which most of you aren't, I'm bending my elbow, and you can kind of see me doing that. And so there's flexing that's happening, right? And because we we are flexible, right? We can be flexible. Some who do more yoga than me are more flexible than I am, but yet we all are flexible. And so I guess what I'm saying in a way is that we need to become we need to practice leadership yoga. I suppose maybe that's what this book is.
Yeah, exercise those muscles a little bit, which makes me think about something you were saying just a couple minutes ago. This approach is harder than leaning into sort of reflexively whatever your style assignment is, the letter that you've been given and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah,
And I think that in part is why you're so big on habits. I mean, you've got a whole chapter dedicated to this. So I'd be curious, what are some of the most impactful, daily or weekly practices that might help leaders become more naturally able to use those flexors, be
yeah.
more flexible over time?
I think the first and probably most important and the easiest to start implementing is creating space for self-reflection. Simply saying, so how did that go?
Mhm.
How did that, not just how did I feel, but how did it go? What worked? What didn't? Knowing that, what might I do next time? Because see, that's the front end of learning, right? That's the front end of saying, well, maybe the way I did it could have been better. What could I have done differently? So we're opening our mind to the idea of flexing. That's where the intention comes in. So I
Mhm.
would say that if I could only give you one to answer your question about what should I be doing on the front end, that would be it. Like practice self reflection,
Yeah.
and then secondly, find others that can give you feedback, right? Whether that's a coach, whether that's a peer, whether that's your team, whatever that might be.
Love it. Love it. One of the things that I really appreciate about the book is that it's more than a book. You have QR codes sprinkled in, with every chapter
Don't
that
remind me.
leads
One of those things isn't
you.
finished yet. Uh,
Oh no, sorry.
oh,
I,
no, it
I,
will
uh,
be. It will
I
be by
know
the
it.
time you get your book, everybody.
I have no doubt. But there's so many tools and opportunities to kind of dig deeper. I wonder, just, could you highlight maybe one or two that you really think is going to extend or amplify the impact of the book?
Yeah, I'll give you two real quick. One is that there will be a pocket guide. In fact, I was in a conversation with my team about how we're going to implement this exactly, but we're creating what's called a pocket guide to those 19 flexors, so that after you've read the book, you can download this to say like, how can, and it's, we haven't figured out exactly how, but it'll be on your phone. The ability for you to then key into those flexors. And the other one is a piece related to what we need to do to help us with the being consistent part. And we said one of those
Mm.
roots, if we use the tree metaphor, one of those roots is our values. And what I find is that a lot of people struggle with, well, what really are my core values? Or like, all these things are important, but you can't have 40 things. You got to have 4 things. And so we've built a tool to help you think through a process to help you on the path towards have determining what your values are from a leadership perspective specifically, because here's what I know, that a blank sheet of paper is really hard.
Mm.
And so we're just
Mhm.
trying to give you, we're not trying to tell you what they should be at all. We're just trying to help you with a process to help you to determine or to continue to uncover those for yourself. Those are 2
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah. I mean, really, flexible leadership represents almost a master class in shifting one's leadership approach, given the content in the book, and then all of these additional resources that you can offer.
Well, I
All
appreciate
right, as we wrap up, I wonder if you've got one piece of advice beyond buy the book when it comes out on March 25.
You don't have to wait. You can buy it today.
Oh yeah, pre-order, pre-order. And it sounds like there'll be an audio version so we can hear it in the author's voice, which I just love.
Yeah.
So beyond buying the book, reading the book and taking it to heart, what's just one piece of advice that you give to leaders who want to embrace a more flexible approach to their leadership?
So here's what I'd say first. You're not listening or watching now. Like, you're already in a special group because you've already decided that you want to get better, or you wouldn't be listening and watching, right? And so I congratulate you on that. And I would just tell you that wherever you are in your leadership journey, um, there's a road ahead,
Mm,
and that you can be more effective. Like, your your potential as a leader is far more than wherever you are on your current journey. And this book is meant to help you on that journey, and I believe help you take a really useful and in many ways novel step on that journey. And I'll just say this: the world needs you, and the world needs your leadership.
mm, mm. Thank you, Kevin, for that wisdom and inspiration. So
Well, you're
I
welcome.
have so appreciated getting my questions answered and being able to be part of this conversation. And I guess I must turn the mic back
Back to
over
me.
to you for our wrap up here.
Yeah, I do have a couple more things to say. And the first one is, everybody, before we started, and Julie and I, before I hit live, she said, well, this is all about you. And I said, no, Julie, this is about both of us. So I'm going to put Julie's website up on the screen for those who are watching. Julie Winkle Giulioni is on the screen, and I'm gonna ask you to say, like, where do you want to point people? How do they connect with you? Tell us a little bit about how they can learn more from you.
Oh, well, thank you, Kevin. Yep, juliewinklegiulioni.com is where most of my content lives, and I show up quite frequently on LinkedIn as well. Would love to connect with folks on topics of leadership and career development.
So it's Julie Winkle, WINKLE, GIULIONI.com. It'll be in the show notes as well if you miss it. Um, or if you're just looking at the title of this episode, you'll see it there as well. I'm going to close. So thank you again, Julie, for doing this. It was
My
super fun.
pleasure,
Uh,
truly.
and I appreciate you investing your time for me and for others in doing this. A couple of other things real quick, everybody. I'm going to ask the question I always ask at the end of every episode. And usually I'm asking about what stuff other people said, but today it's about what I said. The question is, now what? What action will you take as a result? What did you take from this that's useful to you, that you found interesting, but that's really not enough? What I want you to do is think about, okay, now what am I going to do? because Julie mentioned it. The book talks about the skills, but it also talks about the habit. There's a difference between what we know and what we do. And I want you now to be thinking about what you're going to do with what you learned. And of course, we'd love if one of those things that you did was to buy the book. And in fact, I put the link up here earlier, kevineikenberry.com/buy2. And the reason I think you should buy, here's why you should buy two, is because you need to have someone that will walk along with you as you're learning this so that you can help each other, encourage each other along
Mm.
the way. That will tell you not only how you can buy two from wherever you like to buy your books, but how you can get access to full premier access to our upcoming virtual LeaderCon event. Julie's been a guest on virtual LeaderCon in the past. So when you buy 2 copies of the book, you get access to the full recordings, transcripts, and everything else from our upcoming virtual LeaderCon event. You'll learn more about that when you go to kevineikenberry.com/buy2. If you go to buy 10, there's more things you get if you buy 10, and lots more if you want to talk to us about buying lots of books. There's all sorts of extra bonuses you get, including having the chance to perhaps have me come keynote for you just because you bought books. So all those things are true. But one more thing that has cost you absolutely nothing. And because you stayed with us till the end, I told people on social media this morning that if you stayed till the end, I had a gift for you. And here it is. It's kevineikenberry.com/gift. And so if you're listening now, whenever that is, long into the future, if you go to kevineikenberry.com/gift, I'm going to give you a copy or give you access to our masterclass about building confidence in ourselves and others. And it's completely free to you just because you stayed to the end. kevineikenberry.com/gift. Julie, thanks again for joining me and for guiding me through this conversation. It was a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So everybody, if you found this useful, well, go buy some books, okay? And if you found it useful, make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening to this from so you don't miss another episode. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And next week, I'll be back in the other seat interviewing an expert. We'll see you then.